When history lowers its voice, the dead don't just disappear, they accumulate in silence. This story begins where monuments are absent and numbers are argued away. The deadliest war no one talks about didn't end with parades or treaties. It ended with emptied valleys, missing names, and a quiet agreement to forget. Across these plains that swallowed armies and civilians alike, the scale of loss was so vast it became inconvenient, too large to fit into national myths, and so it was buried beneath footnotes and carefully managed memory. Ancient legends hint at this war through gaps and contradictions as stories of migrations, curses, and sudden absences. Archaeology uncovers layers of destruction without celebrated victories. Old maps show entire regions erased or renamed, their borders smoothed over to hide the catastrophe. Forbidden texts describe shortages, forced marches, and administrative decisions that magnified suffering. Yet, political influence ensured these accounts were minimized. Acknowledging the scale would implicate rulers and institutions still revered today. To make matters worse, climate change intensified the disaster. Droughts, floods, and cooling cycles turned policy failures into mass death, leaving evidence scattered in soil, bones, and the silence of generations. Modern technology now helps us reconstruct this conflict indirectly. Satellite surveys, demographic modeling, and climate data reveal a population collapse that far exceeds any recorded war. And this is where the suppression becomes visible. Archives close, terminology shifts, and responsibility dissolves into abstraction. Leaders reframe the catastrophe as inevitable, while survivors were absorbed into statistics. Archaeology reveals mass graves without markers, settlements abandoned without a siege, and infrastructure built to continue extraction amid the ruin. It shows a war fought through policy, neglect, and indifference, rather than with banners, battles, or declared enemies. A war whose casualties vanished from official remembrance across centuries and continents. This conflict persisted because it was never called a war. It unfolded through decrees, logistics, and enforced movement, allowing violence to hide behind bureaucracy. Ancient courts recorded outputs, not lives. When climate stress accelerated mortality and unrest followed, it was punished, not relieved, reinforcing the cycle of loss. Later, political narratives celebrated stability and expansion, completely suppressing the human cost. Modern historians debate the numbers because the absence itself became the evidence of void created intentionally. We're speaking to clearly threatened legitimacy and inherited power. As we look at this landscape of absence, we see that the deadliest war no one talks about survives precisely through this quiet. Understanding it requires listening to what was removed, mislabeled, or erased. The question isn't just who fought, but who decided this was not a war, and why silence proved more powerful than any weapon. It left a legacy measured not in victories, but in the millions who vanished without acknowledgement, and a history still waiting to be spoken aloud. When we think of war, we picture battles, swords, and fire. But what if the deadliest war in history was completely silent? A war with no armies, no final battle, just a slow, grinding disappearance. Archaeology reveals something chilling about certain lost civilizations. As their populations collapsed, their infrastructure actually expanded. Roads were maintained, not for people, but to move resources out of emptying villages. Ancient maps were updated to show productivity, not populations, literally erasing human loss through abstraction. How did this happen? Forbidden letters and hidden records show officials knew the horrifying death tolls, but they were pressured to report stability. Careers, even entire dynasties, depended on the illusion of uninterrupted progress. Climate stress made things even worse. Failed harvests met inflexible quotas, turning scarcity into a full-blown catastrophe. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a disaster enforced by policy. These civilizations didn't fall in flames. They faded away through exhaustion, hunger, and displacement. We find households abandoned in the middle of a meal, tools dropped where they were last used, and cemeteries overflowing. It's evidence of a total collapse without a single recorded conquest. Legends later tried to explain it away as mass migration or divine punishment, shifting blame away from the decisions that caused it. Today, modern technology is exposing just how deliberate this silence was. Digitized archives show us the edits and omissions, the careful changes in language that turned human lives into units of labor. Satellite imagery reveals landscapes permanently scarred by resource extraction. Even as the communities who lived there vanished, the data is undeniable. Mortality spikes line up perfectly with periods of climate stress and increased production quotas. It wasn't random, yet we still hesitate to call it what it was: a war, because naming it assigns responsibility, and that threatens the systems and narratives we've inherited. The violence stays hidden behind technical terms like transition, decline, or necessary sacrifice. This silent conflict wasn't an exception. It was a method of control perfected through administration, silence, and delay. There were no clear enemies or end dates, only regions left permanently altered. Forbidden texts hint at quiet resistance, protests dismissed as disorder, and aid denied to enforce obedience. When a population was depleted, new people were simply moved in, resetting the demographic clock without any acknowledgement of the replacement. The maps were redrawn to show continuity, masking the erasure. In the end, memory itself became a casualty, and because it was never admitted to have existed, this kind of war could be, and was, repeated. It's a dark warning from history. The most dangerous violence is the kind that hides inside systems that look orderly and peaceful. Archaeology often shows us what history books leave out. It confronts us with the unsettling evidence of a war waged, not with armies, but with silence. Mass graves without names, rivers diverted from their natural course, and entire settlements repurposed. These aren't battle scars, but the quiet evidence of power erasing people. For years, this was a story of absence, a puzzle with missing pieces. But now, modern technology is reconstructing the scale of this loss with chilling precision. By aligning climate data, administrative records, and even genetic traces, we can see mortality curves that spike dramatically, not because of battles, but because of policy. When the numbers finally come together, they don't fit into our usual ideas of commemoration. Remembrance requires recognizing intent, and intent was the very thing that institutions denied. They reframed mass death as population management, profound loss as an unfortunate but necessary efficiency, and a man-made catastrophe as simple continuity. Even today, political influence resists naming this history for what it is, because acknowledging it would fracture the legitimacy of the systems that inherited that power. The language used in archives and official debates remains careful, technical, and distant, focusing on definitions rather than responsibility. For the descendants of the survivors, they inherit an absence without an explanation, a trauma that lingers in the landscape itself. Abandoned fields and altered ecologies still carry the scars of extraction and neglect. What made this invisible war so uniquely deadly wasn't just the sheer number of victims, but the precedent it set. It proved that violence doesn't need to be declared to be effective. It showed that suffering can be scaled up invisibly when it's disguised as policy. Our reconstructions reveal a terrifying feedback loop. Silence allowed the harm to continue. Its duration normalized the suffering, and that normalization erased any sense of urgency. Forbidden texts from the time showed that there were moments when intervention was possible, but it was deferred to protect order. That deferral multiplied the death toll, teaching future systems a dangerous lesson. Delay is a weapon, and accountability can be postponed until memory fades and the witnesses are gone. As we trace these patterns forward, the present feels uncomfortably familiar. The mechanisms of control remain intact. The language of denial has been refined, and the distance between a decision and its deadly consequence is now even greater. Archaeology gives us a stark warning. Societal collapse doesn't require an invasion when systemic neglect is enough. As climate instability tests those same thresholds once again, we hear institutions emphasizing resilience without reckoning with the past. History is repeating, not as a dramatic spectacle, but as a quiet, bureaucratic process. The dead remain unnamed because naming them would demand fundamental change, and that change threatens the very structures built on forgetting. The question is no longer why no one talks about this war, but who benefits from that silence. As more evidence comes to light, the truth waits. If we speak it now, it won't just be an accusation against the past. It will be a measure of our present, asking if we will finally call invisible violence by its name, or allow the deadliest war to continue, not with weapons, but with our enduring choice to look away. Thanks for watching.